First of all, I'd like to thank you all for coming on this beautiful day. To come inside is a little challenging, I know. There are 4 more chairs up here. If somebody would like to grab one, that would be great. I'm Lynn Kramer, and I'm from the theater department, and I'm the director of Arts Transcending Borders. And I can't tell you how delighted we are to have Patrick Dougherty with us as our first ATB, which is the acronym for Arts Transcending Borders. How delighted we are to have him here as our artist in residence. But I would be remiss not to mention his assistant, Sam, who's also here, and it's Patrick's son. And it's been really wonderful to sort of watch that father and son relationship working out there in that sculpture together, and it's just a treat. We've been in conversation with Patrick for the past 3 years planning this residency. And as luck would have it, the people at Tower Hill Botanic Garden, were actually thinking about the same thing. And so Tower Hill has been our partner in crime for the last few years, and they just had a launch of unveiling of their piece called The Wild Rumpus in August. And I hope that you'll all have a chance to go out there and see it. It's an exquisite piece. And I think it's a real wonderful thing for the Central Mass community to be able to have 2 Dougherty pieces within a close drive, and people get to see sort of the differences and the similarities in that work. I also want to thank Catherine Acerbo-Bachman from Tower Hill for providing today's treats, our reception treats, when we're done with our talk. It takes an enormous number of people to bring a project like this to fruition. And I'm looking at you, Patrick, because I think when we started, we didn't really quite understand the magnitude of what this was going to entail. But, and so I won't be able to thank everybody publicly today, because I know you're all waiting to hear Patrick speak, and sort of, I don't want you to have to get the hook out and drag me off the podium here. So I just want to mention a few thanks to some of the organizations that have helped support us. But we have already had over 300 faculty, students, staff, members of our community, students from other colleges in the community, people who have worked on past Dougherty pieces that have like this, I'd call them your groupies, maybe. They kind of follow him around and want to work on his pieces that have worked with us on our piece. And I think that number is increasing daily. Yonja would have probably the most latest results on the numbers today. And it really does take an army to be able to unload 7 tractor trailer loads full of samplings that had to be collected and bundled and stripped. But the first thing that had to happen before we could even get to unloading those samplings is they had to be cut. And I have to say, without the chainsaw magic of biology professor Robert Burton and Colin Novick from the Greater Worcester Land Trust, there wouldn't have been saplings to haul, bundle, and strip and build this installation. And for any of you that might be worried about what that cutting entails, this is, just rest assured that the pruning is needed, and that those, what we're doing is kind of ridding of an invasive species, and we're also creating an early successional habitat for other critters to be able to live up in the Greater Worcester Land Trust areas. So that provides the material for the art and makes this really a win-win sort of situation for the community and for us and for the Greater Worcester Land Trust people. I want to thank you to the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation. They have provided the support to initiate the Arts Transcending Borders program, and this is our 3rd and final year of their support, but without their support, this residency would not have happened. We've also had a lot of co-sponsorship on campus. We've had environmental studies programs, the Cantor Art Gallery, the Department of Visual Arts, and all of these departments have provided both funding and labor, lots and lots of labor. And then we have teams of people that have been working out at Crow Hill and Cascade West and on campus. The Natural World Cluster, which is our Montserrat first-year program, has also rallied, and we are thankful to all of the faculty who have supported their students and worked alongside them out there at the site. Thank you all. Facilities has also been a partner with us. We had to really rely on their expertise to make sure that when that foundation pieces were going in, that we weren't hitting power lines or water lines or other things that we don't even know exist out there. So that was a really important partnership as well. And then there are two people, though, that I have to thank especially, and that's Amy Remby from Visual Arts, who stepped in as the production coordinator. You know, she knew how to rent augers, she found the fencing, knew about loppers, and a lot of things that I didn't. So that was very helpful. And very lastly, I must thank Yonja Kriklich, who's the coordinator of ATB. And she's been overseeing and attending to every detail of this, and there are numerous details, for 2.5 years with a patience and a charm. And I have to say that without her creative thinking, her perseverance, her willingness to pitch in, and the amazing organizational skills she has, this residency could not have progressed in such a seamless manner. I'm really hugely indebted to the talented Yonja. Thank you, Yonja. And now about Patrick and stick work. Patrick's from North Carolina. You'll hear that in a second. And he's been bending and weaving locally sourced saplings into architectural structures for over 30 years. Although when you look at him here, that's kind of hard to believe. Patrick, would you start when you were 10? He has created over 270 works all around the world. They've been seen in Scotland and Japan and Brussels and, of course, the United States. And locally, we have one up at Peabody Essex Museum in Salem, and of course at Tower Hill, and now right here in our own Worcester on our campus. He also has an indoor piece at the Renwick Museum, which is part of the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. So if you're heading down at a different time of the year, I suggest you check that out. It's really cool to see one inside, too. This book, called Stickwork, I really recommend this beautiful book. And I'm sure, may I enlist your signature in some of these books if people purchase them? There are some available outside, and there will be some of them up in our bookstore here if you don't get one today. But it really is a beautiful documentation of many of the pieces that he has built around the world and gives you much more information about his interesting arc of this work. But what makes Patrick residency special, really special for Holy Cross? Sure, it's the beauty of the work, but it's how he engages community. And it has been such a treat to watch him interacting with people, passers-by, the students that are working with him out there on the sculpture, and the faculty and the staff and everybody else who's been involved. And you've really touched a lot of people, and you have this humility that you bring to the work and yourself that makes you so accessible to people that it's just really charming. And I keep hearing this from people all over campus, how much they've enjoyed that. And we're a campus that really prides ourselves on doing things for and with others. And I think Stick Work was the perfect for and with others project. And you have really helped us to build our community this fall. Thank you. So now, I'm going to introduce Virginia Regan, Professor of Art History. When ATB was in the development stages 3.5 years ago, Virginia proposed the idea of bringing Patrick to campus. So we brought it to the ATB board, and everybody got excited and agreed that this was the good vision and that this would be a right move for us. And so I'm going to invite Virginia to come up here and to talk a little bit about the earthworks tradition.
Thanks, Lynn. Indeed. Thanks, Lynn, and thanks everybody for being here. This is a brief respite. Patrick Dougherty is part of a tradition now given the label of earthworks. A brief review of his predecessors, Robert Smithson, Nancy Holtz, and Andy Goldsworthy, helps situate his contribution. Smithson is acknowledged as the pioneer. In the Great Salt Lake, Utah, he used over 6,000 tons of black basalt rocks and earth to form a coil 1,500 feet long and 15 feet wide that winds into the water. The level of the lake varies, with precipitation revealing the jetty in times of drought and submerging it during times of normal rain. Thus, we see a principle of earthworks, and Patrick's work, of course, the transformation of a site over time. Nancy Holt had gone to Tufts and majored in biology. Robert Burton, hey, there you go, right? Over a long career, she developed complex pieces that address our relationship with space and the universe and our reckoning of time. One of her best remembered is sun tunnels, 1976 in Utah. 4 massive concrete tunnels, each 18 feet long and 9 feet in diameter, form an open X configuration. On the solstices, the tunnels frame the sun at horizon, at sunrise, and at sunset. In the top of each tunnel, she drilled holes to form the constellations of Draco, Perseus, Columba, and Capricorn. Andy Goldsworthy built on these American experiments. Working in the landscape of Scotland, he focuses more explicitly on the viewer's tactile response to natural materials. He states, "I take the opportunities each day offers. If it's snowing, I work with snow. At leaf fall, it will be with leaves." He also builds an awareness of ephemeral presence. This is exemplified by a driftwood sculpture assembled in a day to be taken by the tide in the evening and dissolved by the water's movements. It's featured in Goldsworthy's 201 film, Rivers and Tides. Goldsworthy also engages in quasi-permanent structures. This serpentine wall of stones was assembled without mortar for the Storm King Art Center, located on the Hudson, some 30 miles north of New York City. Reaction to materials, we know, is conditioned by our memories. Consider Goldsworthy's collection of dandelions that coalesce around a void, and an icicle embracing a tree. Illuminated by the sun, the icicle's beauty is brought to life by the very force that will destroy it. These traditions are all a part of Dougherty's work. We confront the life of the tree, especially the ephemeral life of the sapling. Dougherty offers, basically, as Lynn said, in addition, a gift. The possibility that we become co-creators. Male and female, young and old, accountant and house painter, we become part of the work. We cut the saplings, haul the wood, strip the leaves, bind the twigs, climb a scaffold. He allows this work to become ours as well as his. And through our discovery and our delight in these materials, we experience the most profound Jesuit tradition we own, Ignatius's dictum to experience God in all things. Dougherty is not alone. His work parallels other communal projects such as Christo and Jean-Claude's Gates for New York Central Park in 2005. I must confess that I treasure forever a weekend witnessing the transformed landscape and its visitors. And after we have built Patrick's vision, we play. We wander in and out of twisted columns, soaring arches, and intimate recesses, happily. And so, Patrick, your selection last year as one of the, quote, 9 leading contemporary artists to inaugurate the newly rehabilitated Renwick Gallery of the Smithsonian Museums confirms this. So I welcome an artist who may claim a unique title, providing Michelle Obama with one of her most delightful photo ops, and also getting national media coverage. Patrick.
I don't know if I could do better. Thank you all very much, both from Tower Hill and from Holy Cross, and all the help that I've been given. It's been great. You know, my son Sam, when he was little, he had a children's book about 3 bears that encountered urban sprawl. And these bears, they go up over a hill near their den one morning. They look down. Somebody's built a shopping center overnight. Well, already all these people are hustling and bustling up and down the sidewalk, and they all look so satisfied. Well, the little bears, they're not sure they're happy anymore. And somewhere they find people clothes. In the next sequence of pictures, you see these little pint-sized figures moving amongst the legs of all the other passers-by. And the caption reads, well, now that they're like everybody else, are they really happy? Well, no, not really, because underneath those people clothes still beat their furry little animal hearts. A big wind comes up, and it blows blows men's ties out, women's skirts up. One big gust blows all the little bears' clothes off. And for the first time, they realize who and what they are. They go tearing back across the parking lot, back to a place they could just be themselves. Well, it hadn't been so many years ago, as the crow flies, that I was getting ready for work. I had a coat and tie on and a briefcase. I start down my walkway and a really big wind comes up. And it blows and it blows. The first gust blows my briefcase right down the street. The second blows off my coat and tie, and the third blows everything else away. And as I'm standing there, completely amazed at this unlikely turbulence in my life, the only thing I can feel under those people clothes is the thudding of an animal heart. And I have all these flashbacks to all the times in my life when all I could think about was giving up my regular life, going off into the distance, maybe building a small cabin, and living in a more essential way. Well, it was a time of change for me, and I found myself at the how-to section of the library. I see things like load bearing and R factor and coefficient, and I said, you know, maybe building a house, even a small cabin, is a whole lot harder than I thought. Luckily for me, as I start back across the library, I happen to stumble on a stack of National Geographics. And maybe the first one I picked up was about the barrios in Rio de Janeiro, in which a whole group, the disenfranchised, have to go out into the highways and byways, pick up the dendritis, the cast-offs of urban life, and take it somewhere and build them a place to live. I said, I know I'm not supposed to like this because these are really poor people. And yet they've done an amazing job with the material that they had at hand. And in my mind, it constituted a kind of raw aesthetic. Or maybe it was an article about a tribe from the Amazon basin who had to go into the jungle and forage whatever was there to build the things they need. I said, well, I know these huts don't have any running water or electricity, but they're beautiful. And they fit so well back into the environment from which the material was drawn. Or maybe it was an article about a bird from Africa that had done an amazing engineering feat. I said, well, I know these birds are not smart enough to do this, but in human terms, this would be considered amazing craftsmanship. It was then I realized that maybe I wasn't a normal builder. Maybe I was more of a hunter and gatherer, some kind of an inspiration builder. And you know, I did get started on that house, and I learned some things what really stood me in good stead in my art life. And maybe the first is really the simplest. It's learning to accept what you do. If you don't know much about building, you put a window in the morning, by the afternoon you're thoroughly disgusted with yourself. You're ready to take that window right back out. To be fair to myself, I decided that I was going to do the very best job I could do. At the end of the day, I was going to accept my progress, and the next day I would build on it. The second thing is that if you work with non-standard materials like so many sculptors do, you can't always go to Home Depot and Lowe's and buy the things you need. And similarly, if you decide to cut a big tree down and use it as the mainstay of your house, how do you know it would work, and who would you ask? Well, I played a game with myself, giving it my one best shot. And I said, if I'm the last person on earth, there's nobody else to ask, what do I think? Do I think it's strong enough? And somewhere along there, I began accepting responsibility for the kinds of things that I designed and made. The third thing is that working day in and day out in a very unself-conscious way, I began to see what I liked and what I didn't like. I saw how important personal preference is in making those decisions. And over a period of time, I began to develop my own sense of personal aesthetic. And finally, I saw how important need was in getting anything done. I really needed this house. So I was able to coalesce my best energies and direct my best problem-solving skills. And sometimes when I have a sculptor friend who's not doing that well with their work, I say, hey, you have to figure out how to knead it. Well, I didn't know it was getting out of hand, but my neighbors did. They were always coming down to my house and scratching their head and kicking the dirt. And once my friend Brooks brought another relative from another area of the country, and he looks around, he said, I really like what you're doing here. You're a real artist. Well, maybe for all of you, that would be a great thing for someone to say to you, but for me, it felt like the edge of the earth. I really would like him to take it back. And upon reflection, I realized that as a child, I thought being an artist was the greatest thing you could be. The only trouble was it seemed to come with this tremendous sense of social responsibility. We're supposed to do something great, something earth-shaking, something that saved people. And it came with that correspondingly word talent. You were somehow supposed to be talented. I knew what that word art and talent had to do with Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci. I just couldn't figure out what it had to do with me or anything I was doing at my house. Well, one morning, as if by magic, I found myself enrolling in the nearest art department, taking art history courses in sculpture. And you know, for me, that minute, that day was the best day of my life, because I didn't know there was anybody else like me. I didn't know there were lots of people that liked handling materials and liked seeing their ideas worked out in 3-dimension. The only trouble was I was kind of an art nerd, and I'd walk around and everybody would say, is this art? Is this art? How come this person gets to paint this board blue and call it art? I was just about to hold forth when one of the professors, Mike Cinder, grabs me by the throat. He begins joking me. He said, who in the hell cares if it's art or not? Why don't you just go in there, make whatever it is you're going to make? Who's going to know the difference in 20 years anyway? You know, I needed that permission giving. And I learned some things in school that I think helped towards my continuation as a working artist. Maybe the biggest one is the importance of a role model, because I didn't know if you had to have a psychiatrist standing by when you made your first piece, whether you had to go to New York and work as a waiter in order to qualify, or whether you had to endure some kind of family upheaval. And it wasn't until I saw these relatively normal people who were intensely interested in making things that I realized there was going to be some hope for me. The second thing, it's easy to have an identity crisis at any time in your career, and one in which for a minute you can't remember who made the work. And it's then that you're glad that you have a university art department around, or that you have a friend at a distant location and you call them up and say, hey, are you still working? And somehow when they say yes, you're relieved and you're able to go back to work. The third thing is that I realized that there was a big difference between doers and viewers, between people who make things and who look at things seriously. To me, that looked like two different kinds of jobs. Museum directors and curators and gallery owners, you know, their job is to decide what object is more inherently interesting than another, or where something fits in the lifeline of art. You know, that's not my job. I have to be true to my materials. I have to be true to my ideas. Many times when I start working on something, I really do not know what I'm doing. And if at that point I had to decide whether something was art historically significant or whether it was good or not, I just simply would never get started. And finally, I had to deal with that word talent. And although talent wasn't irrelevant, it just wasn't the issue. I had the right to make what I wanted, whenever I wanted. Basically, I could do as much artwork as I could afford. At that moment, I decided to quit school, go home, build a studio, and get to work. Well, you know, it's one thing to know that you have a right to make something. It's another thing to know what you're going to make and how you're going to make it. Luckily for me, I kept up with the university. I went to see a lecture by a woman named Marty Zelt, who had been a seamstress in her life before sculpture. And she brought Velcro fasteners, zippers, and cloth to her work. When I'm leaving that lecture, I'm saying, I wonder what I already know. I wonder what simple technology, what simple method of joining that I might already be familiar with. And as I'm driving down the road back to my house, I see all these saplings that maintenance crews strenuously in North Carolina to keep down. And like St. Paul being struck off his horse on the way to Damascus, I had an epiphysis. I said, maybe I could use those. It wasn't so unusual that a sculptor, woodsman like myself, would see the potential of the saplings along his driveway. They're plentiful, they're renewable. It's just like having a giant warehouse always at your fingertips. After working with this material for a while, I realized that I had a deeper resonance with it. I had grown up in the woodlands of North Carolina. We have lots of underbrush and intersecting lines. And as some kids looked at clouds and laid in field and looked at clouds, see the architectural details, you know, I looked at the drawing quality of the winter landscape, all those hatch marks, all those drawn lines. And so when I turned to sculpture, it seemed easy to co-opt the forces of nature and play that natural drawing style out onto the surfaces of these large works. Before I could get going, I had to figure out what birds and beavers and other natural shelter builders know about sticks, and that is that they have an inherent method of joining. If you drag a stick through the woods, you'll see what I mean. You start out like this, but before long, you're jerking it along. It's got that infuriating tendency to tangle with everything around it. Really the simplest method of joining. And every stick has a little bit of flexibility, so if you flex it, pull it through a matrix and let it go, it snaps back and holds itself in place. I say of my work that I do large-scale temporary work which I build on site from materials that I gather somewhere nearby. Well, I tell you, it's one thing to know what you're going to use, but what you're going to make is another thing. And if you had seen me at the time, you would have had pity on me, because I could spend maybe a minute in a museum before the running down the steps with sweaty palms and going, you know, they've used all the good ideas up. Or maybe I would look in an art magazine for a few minutes before getting a throbbing headache and said they've exploited every material. Or then you hear in the last census in New York City alone, over 1 million people claim to be visual artists. You'd say, well, there are too many of us. But after worrying about this for a while, I realized that I just love to make things, and the art world was going to have to lump it. I'd like to say two other things, one about the art world in general and another about creativity. You know, for me, the art world is not a wall. What it is a loosely knit group of jobs filled with people, good people like you and I. And those artists, those curators and so forth, they don't tell artists what they have to be or what they have to do. Artists have to decide what they want to do. There's not one of us that hasn't imagined being taken to a major city in a fiery chariot where we and our work gets what it deserves. But we all want different things. Some people want a certain kind of family life. They want a certain kind of car. They want to live in a certain kind of place. And it's these real-world decisions that help set the priorities of the opportunities that you allow yourself to be available to. The second thing is, you know, I arrive with a pair of clippers, and 3 weeks later I have to have a good piece. So I've had a few reflections about creativity. The first is that, hysteria rides on the shoulder of every creative person. And so if you're going to go forth and do something pretty immediate, you have to learn how to channel all that hysterical energy. The second thing is that I have different states of being. I have a state of being in which I do my laundry and eat my dinner, another state in which a door behind which all my problem-solving skills lay. The question is how to go over and open that door immediately. I think we've all been there. If I happen to be home on Friday night and my neighbors come over and we start talking and you see the cares of the week fall away, all of a sudden you think, why aren't we on some kind of national talk show or something? And what I've found is that I think that the best of creativity is one when a person is unself-conscious but fully themselves. It's that kind of state that I seek. It's not about wringing your hands or feeling a lot of anxiety. Making work for me is like just standing around and talking to your friends. You know, the one single thing that I think is unique about my work is that there's no studio doors to close and no place to hide. When I'm at work, people come up and talk to me at any time, and I consider this kind of a cultural exchange, one in which the energy of that place and those people is folded back into the work. When I'm at work, I like representing making in a positive way. I like interceding for the arts. I like demystifying the process. But mainly, I like reminding people that artists are just normal people looking for their rightful place in the world of work. So I'd like to show you a little bit about my work and talk to you just briefly about what I do and how I do it. Let me see, maybe. Oh yeah, this is my house in North Carolina. I've expanded it a little bit since this photo, but I was just like a hunter and gatherer. We found all these logs in this place, and everything that I use, I somehow find or dig up or find locally or find right around me. I dug all these rocks in my backyard and built this. I could tell you the bottom is not quite as good as the top because I learned as I went. Let's see if I'm pointing this up. I have been sequencing materials for a long time in this case. I put all the good rocks on the inside and all the bad rocks on the back. I do the same with my materials all the time. If we come up with 2 or 3 different kinds of sticks, some of them are pretty good, some of them are not so beautiful. The not so beautiful go on the inside and the beautiful ones go on the out. I'm also a gatherer, and all these cedars came out of my woods near my house, and probably was the prodromal thing of going out and just collecting in every ditch bank near where I was working to produce materials that are immediate to the site. This was a early work in the sense that when I'm clearing my yard, I used all these to make the shed, and I've made lots of other sheds and woven things for my neighbors as well. I knew that no one was going to build a monument to me. I just went ahead and built one to myself. And this is about an 8 by 8 by 8 foot cube that was in my yard. I like stonework, and I think that good stonework is a lot of little goodies and big feature stones, and I picked these up on the road between my house and town. All my neighbors are telling me that when their children go away to school, they're going to change their lives. This is called Waiting It Out in Maple, and I put it out at the front. I have a lot of neighbors, and put them out there. They can see themselves. I wanted to show you a little bit about materials because when you see the works, you think that their lines run on forever, but mainly most of the lines are like this. This is red maple. It's outside my studio. It's just that your eye makes the jump. And so this is my friend Scott. We're carrying materials into a gallery. It's an addition subtraction problem where use it up and build the sculpture. This was at Heron School of Art in Indianapolis. The city is getting rid of all these trees because they're expanding their golf course. We were the willing recipient. This is out in Wyoming. Somebody had the erroneous idea that if they took a bulldozer and tried to clean the willow out of their pond, they would have less willow. But it's just not true. We were the recipient of all that excess willow that grew back. This is in Hawaii on the edge of one of the volcanoes. We're gathering strawberry guava and eucalyptus and coffee tree and so forth off the edges of the road. In Ireland, this is coming from a willow farm that's a biomass farm with the hopes that that power plants would actually use this, grind it and use it, but it hadn't been that popular for the power plants. So there's a lot of these farms around that have just excess sticks that they grow. And of course, this was in Serbia. This is the most ancient way of gathering sticks. The Danube was rising, and we had to get our sticks across this river. So we used a horse and cart and piled them on there, and then they drove right through the water with the water right up on the edge of the horses. You can see it was raining that day. This was equivalent to what we've done here. We've had to remove a lot of leaves. And so this was down in Richmond, and there again we had to use a lot of leaves, leafy mass, and we had to clean all the leaves. This was the piece itself called Diamonds in the Rough. It was a pattern of diamond-shaped cabanas, 11 of them, and so that looked pretty good. This is a piece from start to finish. This is a willow farm in Ireland. You know, before in the Middle Ages, before Lowe's, before Home Depot, they raised sticks to do all kinds of things with and work with baskets and all kinds of things. This is a surviving farm from those eras. And every time you cut this stool, which is what they call the stump, you get twice as many sticks. So it's a kind of renewable resource, and each one of these stools will last about 50 years. Hey, did you see that? That was really fun and good. Let's see if I can go back there. No. No, I'm lost. Let me see if I can come to a place here. Okay, you lost the one from Ireland. Sorry. This is, I'm always making, this is start to finish here. Let me see if I can find my way to the front. Oh, yeah, I did it. This is, we always have to bring our materials over to the site, much like we did here. And then this was a Tallaght Community Arts Center in Dublin. And, there's more than leprechauns in Ireland. There's a lot of crime as well. They were afraid that if we put this out on the street, somebody would tear it down. But I still wanted people to see this piece, so I decided to make an Irish round tower, which it's a kind of enigmatic structure in Ireland and around Dublin, where the monks from the 8th to the 10th century made these very tall, thin towers. So I've used this tree to help support the tower. This is my scaffolding truck. This was the scaffold for the tower. This was the final tower. I wanted people to be able to see it from, driving down the road and still enjoy it. This was 2 years later. I left the living material, the living limbs of the tree outside of the structure itself. And I wanted to show you another from one start to finish. This is up at Cornell. This is a great grove of trees, maple trees, excuse me. We have to load them and take them to the site. This was the site between a dormitory and a performing arts center. You can see we've lined out in color all the different services that are under this plaza. We did the same thing over on the site that we were working at here, trying to find the gas and water and electricity. They're going to allow me to drill into this plaza because there's cracks, and they're going to replace the concrete anyway. So I always make a bit of a drawing. In this case, for Holy Cross, I had a little schematic of the footprint of the piece, but in this case, I wanted to make these pieces that interacted with the I can't remember the kind of tree, but I laid the piece out on the ground to get a locust tree that laid these pieces out. I marked where I was going to put my post in, and then the same as we did out here, we drilled holes, drilled into the concrete, and then drilled holes beneath the concrete so that we could put our structural pieces in. As the work progresses, we pull the shape that we want. We did the same thing out here. We set our scaffolding around it. We pull the shape. As soon as we firm up the structural bit, we can cut the shape loose, and it'll hold on. It holds itself. This is a kind of more elaborate scaffolding than we've been using, but this was the final product where there was a companion piece for each one of these locust trees. I wanted to show you how I work. This is a piece at College of Art and Design in Savannah. This was the county jail that had been given over to the school. They took the roof off, but they haven't built the library there as yet at this picture. So I was able to, I thought if it's a jail, I think I'll make some escape hatches or flying carpet or something. It gave me an idea of making a wall piece. The way I work is I work structurally first. And in this case, I've got this platform lift. I'm weaving into the jail bars with bigger sticks. And so I'm trying to get a structural base. It's like making a canvas and then drawing on it. So I'm making a structural base that can hold the aesthetic. And in this case, I'm starting to work now on the aesthetic part of it and put these circularities in it. And once I've got something that will hold, I just put sticks on the way I like it. And then finally, there's the cosmetic phase where you go back and do erasing. And so if you see little inconsistencies you don't like, you just take little sticks and scrim over those. And so all of the inconsistencies that were in that bigger piece, I've smoothed them all out, and that's what we'll be working on in the next week too, on the piece here, when the little bits and pieces that are irritating everybody at the moment, we'll just smooth those out with smaller sticks. And what I wanted to talk about now is that to talk about my work in terms of drawing, temporary, excuse me. This is a piece from a place in North Carolina. This was built on a pink and white dogwood, and so I bent the limbs over a little bit at a time until I got them into this container shape. I knew from an arborist that I had 3 months before it started hurting the piece, but there was a kind of drama in the blooming and then the final leafing out. Ultimately, we had to take the piece down. So I only make temporary work. And this piece is about to be dragged behind this guy's car to the city dump, which is just down the road. But the work is very strong. It holds itself together very well. This was a piece in Swarthmore College. Luckily for me, the tree I was allowed to work on, it was scheduled to come down in 2 years, so they said, have at it. But it had a lot of limbs on one side and no limbs on the other, which meant that I had this strong vertical that I could play off this kind of stacking motion. It's called Abracadabra, and this was its winter configuration. Sometimes we do scary things, get up 50 feet, 55 feet on scaffolding and build the thing so that it looks like that it really accommodates, the sculpture really accommodates its site. This was some dramatic takedown when the tree came down. You could see it was pretty good shape at the 2-year mark. This was a piece in Krokemaken in Denmark. It's a sculpture park, a nature-based sculpture park in which you have to find your materials within the park in which to work. And I noticed that when all the artists looked at the natural world, they seek their own reflection. So this is little big man seeking his own reflection in this pond. You could go up inside his body and look out his face. This was his winter configuration because the area flooded, giving him a more mythic kind of look. And at 2-year mark, this poor thing fell down, fell face first. This was at Frederick Meyer Garden. All of the cultures of the world, and Barlin Craig made face jugs in North Carolina. The Romans made face jugs. So this was my attempt at making a face jug. There are 3 pieces. They're 22 feet tall. They look at, they're right outside of a huge plate glass window. So you look at the sculpture, it looks back at you. At about the 2-year mark, there was a fateful snow of about 4 feet, came tearing down the roof, left these poor things screaming. So I wanted to show you one last thing. This is a piece after Bramante's Tempietto. It's called Sittin' Pretty. And, we planted living material within the wall before we built the work. So that this was at the 5-year mark, and then this was at the 7-year mark. And I have seen pictures now. They're just a big corpse of trees that sit in that spot. But just a way of reminiscing, a talisman for the original work. I wanted to talk about my work in terms of drawing. This is a piece at the North Carolina Museum of Art. Everything you can do with a pencil, you do with sticks. Instead of using strokes like this, you use your whole body to kind of draw, and all the conventions. And so if you hit a piece of paper with a pencil, you hit it with one weight and finish off with another. You basically are making a series of tapered lines. Since sticks are tapered, you have the advantage. If you organize them with the tapers in one direction, they tend to imply motion. So this is a piece that's at the North Carolina Museum of Art. It's about 70 feet long and 16 feet high. And we're just using the best quality of the sticks that we can find, the tapers, the Xing, the kind of using the sticks in every way to kind of implore them to make a kind of a big scale drawing. This was a piece in Sheboygan, Wisconsin at the Kohler. These pieces are worked into the superstructure of the building. You can go over and touch them and they wiggle. But I love this piece because it's used a rosario, a red twig dogwood, and a certain kind of willow that they have there, and give a kind of sense, a beautiful sense of drawing. And they just can lightly touch down. There's a kind of lightness and airiness about it. On the piece we're working on in the yard, we're going to go in and put little looping lines at the very base of this piece, and it just visually lifts the whole thing up. So you figure out different ways of using line to help you do various things that you're trying to explore. This was a piece in Denmark and along the North Sea with the kind of big kind of skywriting, I would say. You get off the ferry, you drive around the corner, and then you see this thing right in front of you. We've just gone across the road and gathered the material right in the ditch across the road and brought it across, set up a little scaffold, and worked in the trees. This was some big city calligraphy. This was at the World Trade Center. And, you know, if you work with the Port Authority, they just say, like, well, you can't bring sticks in our building unless if they touch the wall, the floors, or the ceiling. So I saw, you have to be tricky. You know, I saw that the electricians were using wooden ladders, so I went to Putnam Ladder Company, who's right down the street, and I said, would you lend me some ladders? And so one of the great things about working with sticks and working on site is that you can continue to expand it. If you don't feel like you've quite done enough, you go get some more ladders. So there's a way of being able to respond and react to the space itself. This was at the Phillips Collection in Washington, D.C., and I'm out on the outside of the building looking down through the oculus, a big skylight, and this is 3 floors of sticks. It's about 16 feet across there. So these are the kind of drawing style that complements a kind of an architectural drawn stairway. So you know, I'm used to working in situations where there's ongoing activity. In this case, I used a platform lift in the middle of the stairway. I had a spotter on the stairs, and we just talked to people the whole time while they went through the gallery. So it's quite entertaining. Another piece at the old Museum of Craft in New York City, and exploring their lobby and this turn stairs to good advantage, with a kind of flying wheel that reflected some of the architectural detail. You know, I use volunteers in my work, and this is a work in France, and there's an electrician and a plumber and the dentist from down the street and my assistant. And, you know, over the years, I've learned to work with organizations and use their goodwill and their leverage in the community to help organize the things. And so it started out that they would say, well, we won't pay anybody together. We'll use some of our volunteers. But before long, you know, the volunteers were not satisfied with just gutting. They wanted to work on the piece. There's a lot of closet stick gatherers out there. And so I found ways that we could start, you know, using volunteers and actually helping and working on the piece. And sometimes people walk by and say, well, how do they know what to do? Well, you know, we all have been children, and as children we lived the shadow life of our hunting and gathering past, because for children a stick is an imaginative object. Kids know everything about it. It's a weapon, a tool, piece of a wall. So it's not that far, you know, if you get a group of people and say, well, this is kind of how you do it, instantly they know how to work. We're just cleaning up. You might see that I've had too many bottles of Bordeaux. We made these big pieces that sit in a group of restaurants, and so and this was its final work. They lean on each other. They're in pairs, so they lean on each other, so they're a little bit more stable than they look. This was their glam picture. I wanted to show you this. This was at Middlebury. What I really wanted to show you was the number of people that it took to work on it. So we had lots of leaf cleaning there, as the people that have helped me here and at Tower Hill know this is a bad time of year to use sticks. You have to take the leaves off. All these folks were involved in taking leaves off as well. Wisconsin, at Stevens Point, building this kind of garden of curiosity with these big kind of pieces that you could go inside a courtyard, and the pieces were all around. This is a day at the office for me. This is the University of Michigan. People come up and talk to you the entire time. And so, you know, what I like is generally we have a time in which a couple will come up inevitably, and while the man surreptitiously tries to push the sculpture over with his shoulder, the wife says, "Honey, we could live here." And he'll say, "No, we could not live here." And what I think I've come to understand is that there's a desire for simple shelter, just to cross back across the forest curtain and just breathe with the other animals for a minute. And so you wouldn't have to have your possessions with you. You could just be out there. A lot of times we'll have impromptu openings. This is one at New Harmony, Indiana, where the minute we took this scaffolding away, people just stopped their cars in the middle of the street and came over and took a look. People ran out of the barber shop. They were half shaven. They had to take a good look at sculpture. And in Ireland, if it's raining, it doesn't matter. People come visit you. In Chicago, they're curious as well. And people do send me pictures of themselves in the sculpture, enigmatic pictures. Yeah, like hairdos. Or I can understand this, but can you understand this? How about this? I don't even know. How did it happen? I wanted to talk about my work finally in three different ways. One, about using my sticks in combination with architecture, contrasting contemporary work with ancient ways of working. And this was at the De Cordova in Lincoln. It's some years ago, but this idea of a tower, a kind of castle tower, falling back to its origins as a serf's hut. And so they were not keen about me getting up on the roof, and so I built this mock-up, and we used a crane, and we lifted it up and set it on the roof like a dunce cap. Well, that was all fine and good, but when you looked at it from below, the lines were not strong enough. So we got this bucket truck, and I got up there and had to reinforce the lines up at the top. The tower is 70 feet tall, and you're afraid for a minute, and then you really want to do something, and you tell the driver, "Would you just grab my belt for a minute?" And then you just crawl out on that thing and just start working on getting the lines bigger. And you can see we did invest the surface with a bit larger line. Floridian home being taken over by insects. The Hollywood Art and Culture Center in Florida. This was Max Azria and Melrose Avenue in Hollywood, California, where we gave this building a case of the paisley cloth and caused many near automobile accidents while people looked at it as they drove down the street. I've used trees in my work as well and used those as matrix on which to work at humorously placing sticks back on sticks. This is a tree that was planted 400 years before, and I'm staying in a small Shinto shrine, and the tree was planted the day the shrine was built. A lot of times in Japan, the sacred trees have a rice rope around them, and that gave me the idea of building this kind of welcoming cornucopia around this ancient tree that was connected with this little temple. These were folks that came to visit, maybe some kids, and you can see I've worked into the verge of a bamboo forest to build this piece. This was in England, and working in this Leylandia hedge. And the hedge looks solid, but really it's got these huge cathedral-like spaces on the inside. So if you step in there, you see these huge spaces. And so I've capitalized on that and put window into these spaces and then made a kind of a hallway that walks down the center of the shrub. And this is in Birmingham, Alabama, the Birmingham Museum. What I've discovered, unless you start out on the ground, people really don't look up. But when you go in the building and you look out, you see the top of the building is 50 feet tall, and we serviced ourselves from the top of the building, bringing the materials across onto our scaffolding system. Of course, I think of it as a roller coaster for squirrels, and we've taken the limbs from two different trees and kind of woven across them to make these kind of flying line. I've used the overtones of trees as well, not just working in their branches, but working underneath them. This was in Savannah, in one of the parks there, using an architectural folly underneath this big live oak tree. You could see then all the moss drop down on the things. You could see these source limbs above, Really nice piece. And in Hawaii, working at the Contemporary Art Museum there, using this monkey pod tree and its trunk as a foil, building these pieces that go up and kind of work their way around the upper branches of this tree and back down in a matched set. The piece you saw earlier with Impromptu, it's a hornbeam hedge that had a big opening under the base, and so it gave me the idea that maybe I could make this kind of cliff dwelling up and underneath the limbs where this hollow space existed. The great thing was this was its winter configuration, so you had this kind of verticality in the winter and this other look in the summer. A piece at the North Carolina Museum, and each one of these heads is held up by the crown of a cherry tree. So they're about 35 feet tall, and they look different directions at the corner of this field. You know, it was interesting that the field is surrounded by housing, and the kids came over and played on this thing incessantly. So the museum told me, they asked me to come take it down finally, and there was a mother insurrection. And they came out, and they all came out marching out there and said, "You can't take this down. If you do, we're going to tell the artist on you." And I said, "I'm really sorry. I am the artist, and I have to take the piece down." But the kids really had a great time in it, walking in the body of it. Not only do I work with trees, but sometimes I have no trees to work on. I have no buildings to hook it into. They just say, "This is all I've got." So this was in France. This is my earth-saving turtle. And so it's carrying the earth on its back, and it's got multiple levels of hallways in there until you get into the center of it. My son Sam helped me with his friend, helped me build this thing. This is where it was where we worked, and we worked in the garden of this big baronial thing that belongs to the French government. This was a piece at the Morris Arboretum in Philadelphia. It started out as a snail shell from my garden, became a layer cake. Finally, we were thinking, no, this looks like a Japanese hairstyle from the 14th century. And no, then it became Dr. Zhivago in the Summer Palace. So that's finally what stuck to it. This piece is a sequel to it. That piece came down. They asked me to come build another one. So this is called The Waltz in the Woods. And so this is up currently in their garden. This was a private commission in North Carolina. The thing I really liked about it wasn't really a doghouse, actually. But what I really liked about it is that it thoroughly sticks. There's no wire, string, screws. The thing holds itself together just by the force of entanglement. This was a piece in Brussels called Sleepwalking, and sometimes even in interior spaces, I'm asked to make self-supporting pieces. A piece at Purdue based on the Indian mounds and the snake mounds in the Ohio Valley. They don't look like snakes. They just look serpentine. And I'm taking this picture from the top of the building. You see the beautiful colors of the willow that we used and all these strange hallways. It's a real experience to go flowing around in that thing. At Bowdoin College, I've learned to hook things together so that they'll be snow-worthy. I hooked these things together at the hip, and so it worked out pretty good. A piece that's currently up in South Carolina called Ain't Misbehavin'. It's in front of a performing arts center. It's at the nexus of 5 streets, and so there's 5 heads, and one looks down each street. So that turned out to be pretty good. This was at the Museum of Glass in Tacoma, Washington. It's not there currently, but showing how you can use the sculpture and the reflection of the sculpture to extend the piece. Oh, look at that. That's Peabody Essex and the snow. That is not that long ago. That was in the early spring this year. They got a real snow. I've enjoyed it, and a lot of people from here and also that had visited over at Tower Hill had seen this piece. So I love working there. They have lots of gables there. It's House of 7 Gables. So this has gables on the front and kind of tower from Europe on the back. So if you stand around behind it, there's kind of a turret back there. What I really wanted to show you is how many people would come to see a sculpture burned. this is all the people in Scotland. The whole country is there. And they knew that this piece was going to be burned 1 year later. And so this was the piece. It was organized after the Callanish standing stones, these kind of ancient stones that are stuck up. And you can see mine are not stone, but are made out of the willow that came from nearby. This is my guy that brought the scaffolding to me and lent it to me for scale. Let's see, that's the fateful night, and everybody was there to see this sculpture burn. This is the morning after, and can you believe that the dancers were cooking their breakfast on my sculpture? There it is. Thank you very much.
Time for a few questions. I also want to say that Patrick said that they kind of cleaned up the site a little bit, so any of you who have not been at the site may want to wander over there and look at it. And then on September 23rd, we will have our unveiling and naming of the piece before Patrick heads back home to North Carolina. So we invite you all to join us for that event, and it's at 3 o'clock on the 23rd. But do anybody have questions?
If not, you can always come visit me on the site, I'll tell you that. Yeah.
Do your volunteers in constructing it ever take it in ways that surprise you?
Well, where we live is in a moment of imminent possibility. So if somebody does something, says something, it can influence and move the thing around. Sometimes it's weird to work with little kids because they can do things with sticks that you really would never expect. They can start twisting a stick and then you try to pull it apart and it won't come apart. So, you learn from watching people work and making mistakes, We try to remake the wheel all the time because we make it differently each time and it makes it more interesting. Yeah. Well, the question is about how we take work. We do really first come, first serve. And we get a lot of our work we basically get work through our website. And people look at your work, they see it somewhere, they look at your work, they preview it, then they decide, well, let's contact him. So they contact us and ask about information about it. Sometimes because you're committed, you just pass up some great opportunities. But, it turns out that there's big building and smart people everywhere. And so, when you're thinking, well, it'd be better if we worked here or there, you're forgetting Omaha, Kansas City, Cincinnati. There are some great places to work, and sometimes smaller towns like, that you'll be working in and you'll get these fantastic opportunities, I can recall working in Ames, Iowa, and all kinds of other places. I've just been so happy with the range of places that I've worked. Yeah.
Have you ever had anything go catastrophically wrong with these?
You mean would I admit that? No. Well, not really. I kind of overbuild, and sometimes we've had some heavy snows, but we try to build for that. The first piece at the Morris Arboretum, they had 4 feet of snow, tore down all the trees, and the piece was damaged. But, I always say, if a tornado takes your car, don't expect the sculpture to be there. We do try very hard to build for the environment. Say, if it's on the street and nobody knows what it is, then you're going to have to really work at making it strong enough, because there's going to be some climbing and some messing around with it. So, it's a bit of, it's really worked out for me. Yeah.
Do you have a philosophy of taking them down, or do you just let them go back to
Generally, I would say the line between trash and treasure is very thin with sticks. So one day they're pretty good, and the next day they're starting to look less. You usually get 2 good years out of it, and then you're counting. So maybe you get more. The places where they can do a little repair on it, they last a lot longer.
do you return to do that?
No, generally the site takes the piece down. It's occasionally I'll have to do it, but generally the sites take them down, and maybe use they'll either take them in the night before anybody can figure out they're gone, bring a chipper and chip them. So sometimes they put them in a lake and for a fish, something like that. Yeah.
Is it sad to see them go, or like are you used to that by now?
Well, it is a little bit sad, but one of the things is that sculpture is about ideas, and the ideas are embedded in sculptures. And so in a one way, the community uses that sculpture up. They use it up as it fades, but they also use it up because they become accommodated to it. And they know what it's about. And so a lot of times I'll go to a campus and I'll say, have you seen that great sculpture down there? And they'll say, what sculpture? It's just sat there so long that people have just used it up. The view of it, if you took that sculpture and moved it somewhere else, it would be reinvigorated. So sometimes I think it's all right. And a lot of times we're loosening the public up slightly about sculpture by having a temporary work that everyone knows is going to be gone in 2 years. They're really willing to let some things fly that they might not otherwise, because they really don't know truly nature of it. When it turns out successful, it's easier for the next sculpture. Yeah.
What was in the briefcase?
I was health administration. Aren't I glad I'm out of that? No, I've been happy with my life. Yeah.
When you have these indoors,
Yeah.
it tend to last longer than like outdoors.
The indoor pieces would last forever, really. Sometimes the problems, like at the Renwick, we had to build pockets and put stage weights down in the stick pockets so that we could keep it from coasting along the floor. So sometimes it's arduous to work on the inside, particularly if you can't go into the floor and you can't touch the walls. You really have to work at how you're going to make the piece stable, because I like it if people can go inside the work. But yeah, if it's an indoor piece, it lasts forever. Most of the time it's up for the life of a show. And so people are, they're sad, but something new is happening. Yeah.
Your creative process of developing ideas, is it in response to learning about culture?
Yeah, the question is, coming up with an idea. And, I'm not so slavish about research. What it is what I'm thinking. Like I'll come into a community and I might see something in the newspaper on the plane, and I'll get me started on something. Or I might look at some shrubs and say, well, damn, what if you were inside your shrub? What would that be like? Or it might be some architectural piece that I see somewhere, and I'm like, well, what about that? In this case here, I researched the idea of crucifix and crosses, because Holy Cross, of course, and saw a lot of great symbols, but that led me backwards to more to some symbols that Christians had borrowed from earlier times, and one of them is a unity symbol. It's characterized in lots of Celtic and other places in the world, and it's a set of spirals that turn in on themselves. They're based on vines, and vines turning in on themselves, and it's kind of ways that community was represented in ancient times. And so I just chose that as something that I could possibly use as a footprint for this piece. But you have to try for a piece that allows enough room within the parameters so that you can experiment as you go, because we really don't know much about the materials. So there's got to be a lot of play, a lot of latitude in the final product, even though you might start with a kind of a vague idea of, oh, I'm going to build shrubbery for this building, or I'm going to use this form that I found on the internet and say, oh, I like that. It's based on vines. I'm going to use that. So it's a kind of an open process without really being too concerned about how it truly relates to the symbolism of the place. Yeah.
You've worked around the world. Where would you say was your best experience you had?
Well, I always like where I'm at. I mean, really, because I love the process of building. After a piece is done, it's just kind of old hat to me. You know, I'm really liking the building of it. I like the being with the people in that community. I like really working with people. I like the challenge of scaring yourself to death as to whether you can get finished in time and whether the piece will turn out. So that's the edge that everyone really likes. You know, people that write novels, they don't reread their old novels. They're on to the next one. So, you know, it's the same with you know, you're constantly searching forward, thinking about your next piece, enjoying the place you're at. So this is the last one, yeah? But we work 8 hours a day. One thing I figure is if you work like a workman or a workwoman, you're going to turn out a better product. So we work from 8 to 5. We work from 8 to 5 every day. That allows us to get a whole lot done. And we've allowed, we try to get our volunteers to work for 4 hours in the morning or 4 hours in the afternoon. Sometimes in colleges it's just not possible with class schedules, so we adapt to whoever and wherever we're working. Yeah.
How many times have you got poison ivy?
Do you know about TechNew? No, I do not get, I'm not allergic to poison ivy. Did you get it while you were hauling things down the hill? We tried to get everybody to use TechNew. Was it the rowing team that we were afraid the entire team would get?
The women's crew team.
Yeah, we said, no, before you leave here, you have to put TechNew on because the whole specter of them, the entire team scratching at once.
But I think we wiped out the Worcester supply, so I don't know.
So yeah, there's some good products now that keep you from getting poison ivy. There are bees, and you know, sometimes we've worked where the alligators are not quite out yet, and plenty of snakes. So if you don't like rattlesnakes and other snakes and so forth, you get in the bushes somewhere in South Carolina, you know, you really have to be careful. Yeah.
What about birds and other animals that want to live there?
I don't, you know, it's turned out that birds don't really get frequent places where humans are going in and out all the time. So there is the fantasy that we'd be their king because we'd build the biggest bird nest, but they don't seem to come around that much.
Well,
Thank you all.
Thank you all so much, and there's a reception upstairs that's going to be.
Thank you.
What you're working on right back. That's exactly what David Wilson did.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I knew him. Fortunately, the college, saw his work because this place had terrible windows when you're about to come in. And then, of course, there's that question. Look, once you've done something, but he said exactly the same thing.
Thank you.
Hi.
Hey.
I enjoyed the talk very much.
Thank you.
Do you know anything about basswood?
Not that much. I mean, I know they use it for carving.
Oh, do they?
Yeah.
I didn't know anything about it, but I have some friends that turned me on to get me some honey. This gentleman up in Rutland, Vermont.
Oh, yeah, in Rutland.
Yeah, he's called the...
Yeah, I worked in Springfield. Yeah. Yeah, no, it's definitely me.
Yeah, I took that picture first time I met you.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.